First thing we're going to talk about here is we're going to talk about chemical injection locations. We always want to make sure our chemical injection locations are the very last thing on the return line. We don't want to put chemical injection points before any heater, any UV, any ozone system. It needs to be the very last thing before the pipe returns into the ground back to the pool. Okay, so we have our chemical injection points here. With this system, we're actually utilizing two forms of sanitizers. We got our saline system. All right, that's going to be our salt system. This is our saline 6.0. This is NSF listed for 5 pounds per day. It can do up to 6 pounds per day with 5,000 parts per million of salt in the water. All right, this is our primary chlorine system. We also have here a backup liquid chlorine system. We have our saline 6.0 junction box relay, which automates a backup liquid chlorine pump. So if the salt system ever can't keep up, that relay will engage and it'll trigger that chemical feed pump to dose chlorine into the pipe as well as the salt system running. So that's our auxiliary, that's our backup ORP control, which is liquid chlorine. With any chemical automation system that utilizes an ORP sensor, you have to have pH control. You have to have acid or CO2, some form of pH control to keep the pH balance, since your ORP is dependent upon your pH, and you will have inconsistent readings if you can't keep the pH maintained and balanced. So this is our acid injection right here. You may ask, why do we put the acid injection before the salt system? We put the acid injection before the salt system to help keep this salt system clean. With all salt systems, calcification buildup is something all salt systems deal with over time. How do we clean that calcification off? We utilize acid. So if we're injecting the acid here before the salt system, we're going to help keep this salt system clean. Is it going to be to the point where you never have to clean the cell? Probably not, but it's going to help reduce the amount of cleanings required to take that calcification buildup off. On top of that, it's going to also help keep the liquid chlorine injectors. So say you don't have a salt system, you still want to make sure that your acid injection is installed before your liquid chlorine injection. The reason for that is these injectors can also get calcified up just like salt systems do. So if you have that acid injection before your liquid chlorine injection, it'll help keep that injector from getting calcified up as quickly. So always put your acid injection before either a salt cell or before liquid chlorine. Another thing to keep in mind, if you do have a salt system like we have here, we don't want this acid injection to be within this bypass loop. You can see we have a bypass loop here, so if we ever want to isolate this salt cell, we can utilize these valves to divert water around. But if we have this pH sensor within this bypass loop, if we ever have to isolate the cell, we're not going to be able to utilize this acid injection point. So the acid injection point needs to be before the bypass of the salt system. If not, again, you're not going to be able to utilize this pH injector if it's within the bypass loop. So it's very important to make sure you select the locations of your injectors. And again, I cannot stress this enough. These chemical injection points, whether, again, if it's a salt system, liquid chlorine, an erosion feeder, or if it's a acid injection point, CO2 injection point, we want those things to be the very last thing in line on the return line. We also want to make sure, again, our sample line location that's feeding our sample vessel to where we're actually testing the water coming through, we want to make sure that is before any of these chemical injection points. These chemical injection points need to be the very last thing. And if you do have a heater, you do have a UV system, you want to make sure there's a check valve before that first chemical injection point, so there's no way that chemical can backfeed into that piece of equipment if the pump were to ever shut off. So it's very important to make sure that we install our sample lines in the correct location, as well as our chemical injection points. Whether, again, if it's a salt system, erosion feeder, liquid chlorine, or an acid or CO2.